Whenever you want to hear a love story, come to our channel. Here you'll find romances that are truly hot. Subscribe now. It began with an invitation, an elegant card embossed in gold, sealed with a symbol only those who knew him well would recognize. The young man behind it all was not just another figure adored by millions online. He was a phenomenon, a name that sparked curiosity, admiration, and envy in equal measure. With every post, every photo, every glimpse into his extravagant life, he drew crowds closer. And yet, behind the carefully crafted images of private jets, designer suits, and champagne-soaked parties, there was something else, something he rarely allowed anyone to see. Loneliness. When he decided to open the doors of his mansion for a season unlike any other, it wasn't only about entertaining friends. It was about surrounding himself with laughter, voices, and energy that could fill the echoing silence of his opulent home. He invited those he trusted most, or at least those he believed he could trust. Old friends from his school days, companions from the whirlwind of fame, and new acquaintances who had slipped into his world of influence and wealth. Each of them received the same card, the same alluring promise of a summer that would blur the lines between reality and fantasy. The mansion itself was a masterpiece. Perched on a cliff overlooking an endless stretch of ocean, it seemed to rise from the rocks like something out of a dream. Vast terraces opened to the horizon, marble staircases wound like rivers of stone, and every corridor whispered of stories yet untold. It wasn't just a house, it was a stage, and he intended this gathering to be the most memorable performance yet. As the guests arrived one by one, the mansion came alive. Cars purred up the long driveway, their headlights slicing through the dusk. Laughter spilled from the grand entrance, echoing against polished floors. The air was thick with perfume, cologne, and the unspoken thrill of being part of something extraordinary. Everyone knew that in his world, nothing was ordinary. A simple dinner could turn into a headline, a casual conversation into a viral sensation. He greeted them with his trademark smile, the kind that seemed to promise secrets just waiting to be discovered. Cameras clicked, glasses clinked, and soon the atmosphere was buzzing with excitement. Yet, amid the sea of familiar faces, there was one that didn't belong, at least not in the same way. She arrived quietly, carrying her equipment with a kind of grace that went unnoticed by most. To the others, she was just part of the staff, another piece of the elaborate puzzle he had arranged for this gathering. But to him, she stood out, not because of what she carried, but because of how she carried herself. She wasn't dazzled by the chandeliers or the glitter of wealth. Her eyes scanned the mansion not with wonder, but with intent, as though she was searching for something beyond the marble and glass. The photographer had been hired to capture the essence of the season, to freeze moments in time that would later be remembered as golden fragments of summer. Yet even as she adjusted her camera and framed her shots, she remained a mystery. There was a quiet intensity in her gaze, a presence that couldn't be ignored, and though she stayed on the edges of the group, blending into the background, his attention kept drifting toward her. For now the invitation had done its work. The mansion was full, the stage was set, and the season of secrets had begun. What none of them knew, not even the host himself, was that this invitation would open more than just the doors to a summer of laughter and luxury. It would open the door to truths long buried, to desires unspoken, and to a love that would be tested by the very shadows lurking within the mansion's walls. The night stretched on, music drifting into the air, the ocean below crashing like a steady heartbeat. Guests danced, stories unfolded, and the promise of unforgettable days ahead lingered like the taste of fine wine. And in the midst of it all, two lives, so different yet destined to collide, stood on the edge of a story neither of them could have foreseen. The following morning, while the mansion still hummed with the echoes of laughter and the soft residue of music from the night before, the sun rose across the ocean, casting streaks of gold and pink across the sky. The world beyond those sprawling windows seemed perfect, untouched, endless. Inside, however, stories were already beginning to weave themselves together, stories of friendship, ambition, hidden jealousy, and something more elusive. The quiet arrival of a woman who carried with her more than just a camera. She had not entered through the grand doors like the others. There had been no waiting cars, no designer luggage spilling out of trunks, no embrace from the host who greeted his friends with charisma and charm. Instead, she slipped in with the workers, her equipment carefully packed, her expression calm but focused. To most, she was invisible. The staff carried trays of champagne, arranged flowers, polished surfaces, and she simply blended into their rhythm. But while others served to maintain the illusion of perfection, she observed it. Her lens would not only capture smiles and celebrations, but also those moments in between, the flicker of doubt in someone's eyes, the tension in a laugh that came too late, the silence that lingered after whispered words. The influencer, radiant and commanding as always, noticed her almost immediately. Not in the way he noticed the others, who wore sequined dresses or sharp suits designed to be noticed, but in a way he didn't expect. She seemed entirely unbothered by the grandeur around her. While his friends leaned against marble columns and bathed in the luxury of his home, she remained steady, grounded, her focus on her camera. Each time she lifted it, it was as though she disappeared into a world of her own making, one where truth was more important than appearances. At first, he told himself it was nothing. She was just a photographer, hired to document the season. But as the hours passed, his eyes sought her out in crowded rooms, at the edges of candlelit dinners, beside the staircase where guests posed and laughed. There was something magnetic in the way she held herself, an invisible thread that tugged at him each time she moved quietly through the mansion. She, on the other hand, had trained herself not to be noticed. That was the very essence of her work, after all. To watch without drawing attention, to see details others missed. And yet she felt his gaze linger on her more than once. It unsettled her, not because she disliked attention, but because attention was precisely what she could not afford. She was not there merely to capture beautiful moments. She was there with a purpose buried deeper than any of the others could imagine. Her camera was not only a tool for art, but for truth, for uncovering something hidden within the walls of that mansion and the family that owned it. At dinner that night, the guests gathered around a long table adorned with crystal glasses and flickering candles. The food was a feast, the conversation lively, and yet the photographer was there too, her presence subtle, her camera rising and falling like a heartbeat. She framed the host as he laughed at a friend's story. She captured the sparkle of candlelight reflecting off polished silver, and she froze in time the very image of joy. But behind every shot, her eyes were searching for signs, for cracks in the perfection, for the faintest trace of the truth she sought. The host caught her eye across the table once, just once, when she had lowered her camera for a breath. It was a fleeting glance, but it felt heavier than it should have been. He smiled, charming, warm, the kind of smile that had won him millions of followers. But when she didn't smile back, when she only dipped her head and returned to her work, he felt something stir in him that had nothing to do with performance. It was curiosity. Who was this woman who could resist not only his wealth and fame, but his attention altogether? Later, when the guests dispersed into smaller groups, some heading to the terrace to drink beneath the stars, others gathering by the piano for songs and laughter, he wandered toward the hall where she stood adjusting the settings on her camera. She didn't notice him at first, her brow furrowed in concentration, her fingers delicate yet precise. It was then he saw her not as staff, not as an observer, but as something different. There was artistry in her, a depth that none of his glamorous friends seemed to possess. "Enjoying the evening?" he asked casually, his voice carrying the effortless ease of someone used to making conversation. She glanced up, startled for a moment, before answering, "It's beautiful, but I'm not here to enjoy it. I'm here to work." Her tone wasn't unkind, but it was firm, and it caught him off guard. Most people bent toward him, eager to be drawn into his circle, eager for approval. She, however, kept her distance, not only physically, but in spirit. "I suppose that's true," he replied with a soft chuckle. "Still, even work can be enjoyed sometimes." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she lifted her camera and, without asking, snapped a quick photo of him. He blinked, momentarily disarmed. "Why that moment?" he asked. She studied the camera screen, her expression unreadable. "Because you weren't posing." Then, as quickly as the moment came, she walked past him, blending once again into the shadows of the gathering. He stood there for a long time afterward, turning her words over in his mind. For the first time in a long while, someone had seen him without the mask, without the performance, and it unsettled him in a way that felt both dangerous and exhilarating. What neither of them knew was that this was only the beginning. Her presence in the mansion would soon unravel more than just his carefully crafted image of charm and perfection. It would peel back layers of truth, of secrets, of histories buried deep within the foundations of his family's name. And as she sought the answers she had come for, he would find himself seeking something else entirely. Her. The days that followed unfolded like scenes from a film, each moment painted with sunlight spilling through vast windows, the sound of waves crashing far below, and the steady hum of voices filling the mansion with life. The guests lounged by the infinity pool, clinked glasses at midnight feasts, and documented every glittering second for their followers. Yet, amid the glamour and chaos, something quieter, more dangerous, began to stir between two people who seemed to stand on opposite sides of the room, the host and the photographer. He found himself watching her more often than he admitted, even to himself. At first, he convinced his mind that it was curiosity, that he simply wanted to know why she resisted the magnetism that pulled everyone else into his orbit. But as days turned to nights, and as nights melted into dawns that carried whispers of secrets through the hallways, he began to realize that it wasn't just curiosity. It was something else, something far less controllable. She was different. While his guests basked in attention, she seemed to shrink away from it, preferring the shadows where her camera could do the talking. She didn't laugh too loudly, didn't boast, didn't play into the endless performance of wealth and privilege that consumed his world. And yet, she had a presence that drew him in with a force he couldn't ignore. There was a gravity in her silence, a weight in her eyes, as though she saw things others refused to see. The mansion was full of noise, music, laughter, splashes from the pool, the clink of crystal against marble. But between them, there was a different kind of sound, the quiet hum of tension that grew stronger with every accidental glance, every brush of proximity, every pause in conversation where words threatened to become something more. It was an attraction, unspoken, yet it lingered in the air like electricity before a storm. One afternoon, he found her alone on the terrace. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond her. She was reviewing her shots, her camera screen reflecting the sunlight. He stepped closer, careful not to intrude, yet unable to resist. "Do you ever take a photo just for yourself?" he asked, his voice soft, almost tentative. She looked up, surprised to find him there. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she closed her camera and said, "Sometimes. But those photos aren't for anyone else to see." He smiled, intrigued. "So even the photographer has secrets?" Her eyes lingered on him, sharp yet unreadable. "Everyone does." The words struck him harder than he expected. He wanted to laugh it off, to toss back a witty remark, but instead he found himself staring at her, searching for the meaning beneath her calm exterior. She broke the silence by lifting her camera and snapping a photo of him against the backdrop of the sea. This time, he didn't ask why. He simply let her capture him as he was, unguarded, unpolished, real, polished. That night, during another of the mansion's endless dinners, their gazes met across the long table. She sat at the far end, quiet, almost blending into the background. He sat at the center, surrounded by chatter and laughter. And yet, when their eyes locked, the room seemed to blur. He spoke to others, he laughed at their jokes, but he felt her presence as though she were seated right beside him. And when she lowered her gaze, something inside him ached with the absence. She felt it too, though she fought against it with every breath. Attraction was dangerous for her, more dangerous than he could ever know. She had come here with a mission, with a purpose that left no room for distractions, especially not for the man at the very heart of what she sought. And yet, she couldn't deny the way her chest tightened when he smiled. The way her hands trembled ever so slightly when their shoulders brushed in passing. The way her mind betrayed her by replaying their brief conversations in the quiet of night. One evening, as the party spilled into the garden lit by lanterns, he found her again. She was photographing the scene, the glowing faces, the glitter of lights against the leaves, when he stepped into her frame. "Careful," he teased, his voice low. "If you take too many photos of me, people will start to think you like me." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, a rare and fleeting expression. "Maybe I just think you're interesting." "Interesting," he repeated, savoring the word. "That's not usually what people call me." "What do they call you?" she asked. He leaned closer, his eyes searching hers. "Unreachable, untouchable, a fantasy." Her gaze didn't waver. "And what do you call yourself?" For once, he had no answer. Her words stripped him bare in a way that no one else's ever had. He was used to admiration, envy, desire, but not to being seen. Not like this. The night pressed on, music rising, voices lifting, but between them the silence grew heavier, more intimate. Neither of them spoke of what they felt. Neither dared to confess the truth of the pull between them. But it was there, undeniable, like a secret carved into the walls of the mansion itself. Unspoken attraction, fragile yet fierce, had taken root, and though neither admitted it, both knew that it was only a matter of time before the silence gave way to something neither of them could control. As the summer unfolded, the mansion's grand corridors seemed to take on a life of their own. By day they were flooded with sunlight, polished floors gleaming like rivers of gold beneath the feet of the guests who drifted from room to room. By night, however, the same hallways transformed into something else entirely. Shadows stretched long across the walls, chandeliers flickered like watchful eyes, and the silence between rooms carried with it the weight of things unsaid. It was in these hours, when the laughter dimmed and the world slowed, that the whispers began. It started subtly, a door closing too quickly when someone approached, a hushed conversation that stopped mid-sentence the moment footsteps echoed down the marble. Guests who once embraced the glamour of the mansion with unguarded delight now carried themselves differently when they thought no one was watching. There were glances exchanged that hinted at rivalries, at jealousies, carefully hidden beneath smiles. Secrets thrummed beneath the surface like a current, waiting for the right moment to surge. For the photographer, these moments were everything. While others grew drunk on wine and wealth, she prowled the edges, her camera hanging at her side, her ears sharp. She captured not only the curated perfection, but also the cracks within it. The unease in a guest's smile, the way another clenched his jaw during a toast, the tension laced in a careless remark. She knew what she was searching for, and with each passing day, the house itself seemed to guide her closer to it. One night, unable to sleep, she wandered the hallways with her camera. The mansion was eerily quiet, save for the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. Her footsteps echoed softly as she moved past portraits of ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to follow her every move. She paused in front of one particularly large painting, an austere man in a dark suit, his expression severe, his hand resting on the shoulder of a young boy. Something about the portrait unsettled her, though she couldn't explain why. She lifted her camera, framing the image, and as the shutter clicked, a draft swept through the hall, rattling the curtains. She froze. Somewhere deeper in the house, she thought she heard voices. Following the sound, she crept closer, the murmurs growing clearer with each step. Around the corner, she caught fragments of conversation. Two of the guests, their tones sharp, urgent. "He can't find out," one hissed. "If he does, everything falls apart." The other's reply was too soft to catch, but the edge of fear was unmistakable. The photographer pressed herself against the wall, her breath caught in her throat. She longed to lift her camera, to capture proof, but she dared not risk the shutter's click. She stood there, trembling, until the voices faded and footsteps retreated into silence. The following morning, the mansion was as radiant as ever. Guests basked in the sun, laughter bubbled through the air, and not a single trace of the night's tension remained on their faces. It was as though the darkness had been a dream, but she knew better. The whispers were real, and they were multiplying. The host too began to sense it. He noticed how quickly conversations shifted when he entered the room, how glances darted away when his back was turned. His friends, the people he trusted to fill his home with joy, seemed to be carrying burdens they refused to share. And then there was her, the photographer, whose eyes seemed always to be searching, always alert. He caught her staring once, not at him, but at the house itself, as though she were trying to unravel it. When he asked her what she was thinking, she only replied, "This place has a lot of stories, doesn't it?" He had laughed it off, but her words stayed with him. For the first time he wondered if there were things about his family, his home, that even he didn't know. The nights grew heavier with unspoken truths. Whispers echoed in stairwells, shadows moved just out of sight, and secrets pressed against the walls of the mansion like ghosts begging to be heard. And while the guests drowned their unease in wine and music, the photographer kept listening, kept searching. She knew the whispers were leading her somewhere, toward the reason she was truly there, and toward a truth that could shatter everything. The summer that had begun as a glittering spectacle was slowly twisting into something far more complex. Beneath the champagne and curated smiles, beneath the golden light that poured through the glass walls of the mansion, the truth pulsed like a hidden heartbeat. And at the center of it all was the photographer, the woman who seemed to drift quietly through rooms, yet carried with her the weight of a mission that none of them could imagine. She had not come merely to take pictures. That had been the cover, the role she slipped into with practiced ease, blending her lens into the chaos of parties and the stillness of dawns. But behind every click of her camera, there was intention. Every photo she snapped, every glance she studied, every whisper she followed in the hallways was part of a larger puzzle she had come to solve. The mansion was more than a backdrop. It was a labyrinth of history, of wealth built on shadows, of secrets buried beneath marble floors and gilded ceilings. And she had been sent here to uncover them. The truth was personal. Her connection to this family stretched back further than anyone knew. Long before the influencer had built his empire of fame and fortune, long before this mansion had become a stage for excess, there had been a story hidden in the past, one that had scarred her life in ways she had never forgotten. She carried it like a ghost, a reminder of what had been taken from her, of what had been lost. And now, standing inside the house of the very people who held those answers, she felt the gravity of her purpose in every step she took. Yet the mission was not without its dangers. The family had power, the kind that silenced questions before they could even be asked, the kind that buried mistakes beneath layers of luxury until they looked like triumphs. She knew that if her true reason for being there was discovered, she would be cast out at best, or destroyed at worst. That was why she wore her mask of professionalism so carefully, hiding her curiosity behind the neutral shield of her camera. But the host made everything harder. His charm, his warmth, his unexpected vulnerability, they unsettled her focus. Each time he drew closer, each time his smile slipped into something real, each time his gaze lingered longer than it should have, she felt her resolve falter. Attraction was dangerous, but it was also undeniable, and the more she felt herself pulled toward him, the more dangerous her mission became. How could she expose the secrets of his family when part of her longed to trust him, to know him, to love him? One evening, as the guests sprawled across the mansion's terraces, drunk on the fading sunlight, she found herself alone in the library. The room smelled of leather and dust, lined with books that hadn't been touched in years. Her fingers traced the spines absent-mindedly until she came across a folder tucked between volumes, a collection of photographs yellowed with age. She opened it carefully, her breath catching as she studied the images. The same mansion, decades earlier, filled with faces that carried resemblances she couldn't ignore. Among them was the severe man from the portrait in the hallway, his hand resting on a boy's shoulder. The boy's eyes, even in black and white, gleamed with a familiarity she could not deny. They were the same eyes as the man who now hosted her in his house, laughing and smiling as though he had never known darkness. Her heart pounded. She was getting closer. These photographs weren't just relics, they were clues, proof that the stories whispered in the hallways were rooted in truth. Proof that what she sought was not a myth but a reality, waiting to be uncovered. But as she slid the folder back into place, she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around, her pulse racing, to find him standing there. His expression was curious, not accusing, but she still felt caught. "Looking for something?" he asked softly. She forced a smile, gripping her camera tightly. "Just inspiration." His eyes lingered on her a moment too long, as though he didn't quite believe her. Yet he said nothing more. Instead, he stepped closer, brushing his hand over the spines of the books. "This house is full of stories," he murmured. "Some of them better left untouched." She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Was it a warning or simply an observation? She couldn't tell. But the weight of his words followed her long after she left the library. Her mission was growing clearer and yet more complicated with every passing day. The mansion was not just a place of luxury. It was a vault of truths waiting to be unlocked. And as she balanced on the edge between her duty and her heart, she knew that sooner or later the hidden mission would be revealed. And when it was, nothing, not love, not wealth, not even the walls of that grand estate, would remain the same. The season at the mansion, which had begun with glittering promises and golden laughter, was nearing its inevitable climax. The air itself seemed heavier, as though the very walls carried the weight of what had yet to be spoken. By now, the photographer's quiet search had unearthed fragments of truth. Old photographs, whispered confessions, fractured details that formed a pattern too sharp to ignore. The closer she came to the heart of the mystery, the more the mansion itself felt like it was closing in around her, demanding she decide what to do with what she had learned. The host had changed too. The man who once wore charm like a second skin now found himself stripped bare whenever her eyes met his. He had lived his life surrounded by admirers, by friends eager to bask in the reflection of his wealth, by strangers who adored the idea of him more than the reality. Yet with her, none of that mattered. She didn't want the spectacle, the image, or the empire he had built. She wanted truth, and in her pursuit of it, she forced him to confront something he had long buried, the truth of his own family. The night it all unraveled began quietly. Guests lounged in the garden, wine flowing, lanterns swaying in the ocean breeze. Music drifted softly from the piano, played by hands too drunk to care about rhythm. But she was not among them. Instead, she stood alone in the library once more, the folder of photographs spread out before her, her heart racing as she pieced together the story. A story of wealth built on betrayal, of deals made in shadows, of lives destroyed so others could live in gilded excess. Her family's story, woven into his. He found her there, the flicker of candlelight painting her features in shades of gold and sorrow. For a moment, he didn't speak. He simply watched her, as though he knew that once words were spoken, nothing could return to the way it had been. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "You're not here to take photos." Her hands tightened around the folder. She turned, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time, she didn't try to hide. "No," she whispered. "I'm here because of them, because of what your family did." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended between them. His chest tightened, a storm of denial, anger, and fear colliding inside him. Yet beneath it all was a deeper, sharper wound, the realization that he had felt her distance all along. And this was why. She hadn't come for him, she had come for the truth. "What did they do?" he asked, his voice low, trembling. She told him, in fragments at first, then in waves that poured out of her like floodwaters breaking a dam. Stories of lies covered up, of injustice left to rot, of her family paying the price so his could rise untouchable. As she spoke, her voice cracked under the weight of years of silence. She hadn't planned to tell him this way, but the moment had demanded it. The truth had clawed its way out, unrelenting. When she finished, the silence between them was deafening. He stood motionless, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. The mansion, once a symbol of pride, now felt like a cage built on someone else's suffering. And the woman before him, the one who had captured him without even trying, stood as both accuser and salvation. "I didn't know," he whispered at last, his voice breaking. "I swear to you, I didn't know." Her eyes softened, though her pain didn't vanish. "Maybe you didn't, but the truth is still there and someone has to face it." He stepped closer, the distance between them charged with everything unspoken. "And if I do? If I face it? If I dig into the shadows of my own family, what then?" She looked at him, her voice trembling but steady. "Then maybe there's hope, for both of us." It was a fragile moment, balanced on the knife's edge of love and betrayal. The weight of history pressed down on them, demanding they choose to let the truth divide them forever, or to face it together, no matter how much it shattered. In that silence, filled with the sound of the ocean crashing against the cliffs below, he reached for her hand, and though her instinct was to pull away, she didn't. Her fingers trembled, but they stayed entwined with his. The season at the mansion would not be remembered only for its glamour or its excess. It would be remembered as the summer when secrets clawed their way into the light, when love bloomed in the unlikeliest of places, when two hearts collided against the backdrop of betrayal and chose, despite everything, to believe in the possibility of something more. Because in the end, secrets revealed do not only destroy, they also set free. And in the ruins of what they uncovered, they found not an ending but the fragile, breathtaking beginning of a new story.